I knew something wasn't right the morning my mailbox sat empty for the fifth straight day. I had watched the postal truck stop at my gate twice, in fact. At 76, people assume you question your own memory first, that you doubt your eyes before doubting others. But I have never been the kind of woman who forgets what she sees clearly. When I mentioned it to my daughter, Helen, she gave me that familiar smile, soft, patient, the kind she reserves for people she believes are slipping. "Mom, you probably set the letters somewhere and forgot," she said, brushing crumbs off my kitchen table like my entire life was a view. Mess she needed to manage. I didn't argue. Age teaches you when silence is easier. But something shifted inside me all the same, a quiet click, like a lock turning. That afternoon, the house felt unnaturally still. Sunlight stretched across the floor in long golden shapes. I had lived here for 42 years, long enough to recognize every creak in the hallway, every stubborn cabinet hinge, every faded strip of wallpaper. It's strange how house can remember you more faithfully than your own family. Helen stopped truly listening to me years ago. Her husband, Mark, never really started. Still, I told myself they were busy, not unkind. Helen had developed a habit of stopping by without notice, to help. She moved through my rooms like an inspector opening drawers, shifting papers, straightening stacks of mail, nudging objects just slightly out of place. Every visit ended the same way. Something missing, something relocated. My independence, erased inch by inch, disguised as concern, and I let it happen. I thought that was what mothers did aloud their children, the comfort of feeling in control long after it was needed. But the missing mail gnawed at me. The day before, my neighbor, Miss Crawford, 2 houses down, had waved at me while balancing grocery bags on her hip. "Margaret," she called, "your mail carrier left a bundle for you yesterday." Thick envelope looked official. She said it casually, unaware her words dropped like a stone into still water. A legal-looking envelope. I never received it. The next morning, I checked the mailbox again, empty. Just the faint metallic smell of treated steel lingering inside. A woman might imagine things, but not this. Not after 7 decades of paying attention to the patterns of her own life. Back inside, I brewed tea I barely tasted. Outside the window, my garden drooped under early autumn's weight. Brown leaves clung stubbornly to the hydrangeas like memories refusing to let go. I watched the wind shake them loose and wondered when my daughter had decided she could hide things from me without consequence. By mid-afternoon, Helen called. Her voice was bright, too bright, the kind she uses when she isn't telling the truth. "Just checking on you, Mom. Did you see the medication reminder I left on the counter? You should keep it somewhere visible." I nearly laughed. I remember every pill I've taken since I was 62. Instead, I told her no mail had come again. There was a pause, barely noticeable, but it was there. "Well, the postal service is a mess," she said too quickly. "Don't worry about it. Don't worry." Words people use when they want you quiet. After the call, I sat in my armchair and let the room settle around me. My body felt old, yes, but my mind was sharp. And that combination is dangerous for people who assume you're fading. It wasn't the missing letters that troubled me most. It was the certainty settling deep in my bones that someone had decided. They knew how to run my life better than I did. They thought my world was shrinking, that I was shrinking with it, but I hadn't spent 76 years learning how to stand on my own just to be handled like something fragile. As dusk laid its violet shadows across the street and the mail truck passed again, something inside me, steady, quiet, ancient, told me this wasn't a mistake. It was deliberate, and deliberate things leave trails. People like to say growing old happens gradually. In my experience, it arrives through small permissions you give away without noticing. First, you let someone carry your groceries even when your arms are still strong. Then you allow them to speak during doctor's appointments because it's simpler. One day, you wake up and discover half your life has quietly been reassigned. I didn't notice the shift at first. It came wrapped in concern, spoken in gentle voices. Helen had always been the organized one, the child who color-coded her school. Folders and made chore lists for everyone else, whether they asked or not. I used to admire that about her. After Patrick died, I leaned on it. But organization turns into control the moment. Someone forgets the difference between helping and deciding. Somewhere along the years, Helen stopped asking what I needed and started choosing for me. Mark only amplified it. He works in property management and carries himself like a man convinced common sense belongs exclusively to him. When he first married Helen, he was polite, cautious with his words around me. But after they settled into their large brick house on Fairmount Lane, he began treating my home like a smaller, messy extension of theirs. Every visit came with critiques. A loose railing, an uneven step. Appliances past their prime. He would shake his head and mutter, "This place really needs oversight," as if I weren't standing right there. The first time they mentioned simplifying things, it was over a misplaced casserole dish. "Mom," Helen said gently, "you've always been independent, but there's nothing wrong with letting us handle some responsibilities." She smiled, but there was calculation behind her eyes and expectation. That I would agree. Mark nodded beside her, solemn, like a judge confirming her conclusion. I remember feeling boxed in, even though the room was wide open. From there, the boundaries blurred quickly. Helen began stopping by without warning to sort my mail. She stacked envelopes, tossed what she called clutter, and reorganized my desk until everyday items migrated without explanation. Mark offered to review my utility bills, insisting companies took advantage of elderly customers. He spoke in a tone that suggested I'd already lost something essential: clarity, perhaps, or competence. I stayed quiet, partly because confrontation has never been my nature, partly because I believed a moment would come when Helen remembered I was still her mother, not a project. Sometimes she would sit with me in the garden, sipping lemonade, and I'd catch a glimpse of the girl who once tucked lavender behind my ear. I held onto those moments longer than I should have, but the pattern sharpened when a new water heater appeared. I later learned Mark had used my checkbook without asking. "You needed," he said, waving off my concern. "Family decision." As if my decisions no longer carried weight. Another time, I found Helen in my linen closet, sorting towels into piles labeled keep and donate. "You have too many," she explained. "This is for your own good." I stood in the hallway feeling strangely transparent, like they were looking through me at a smaller version of myself, quieter, easier to manage, but I still had edges. I just hadn't used them. The mail issue worsened gradually. A missing bill, a delayed bank statement. When I asked once about a medical notice I expected, Helen laughed dismissively. "You and your paperwork," she said. "You worry too much." There was impatience in her voice, something new. As if my life's details had become inconvenient, I tried to explain it away. "People are busy. Mistakes happen," until one afternoon I saw her slip a handful of envelopes into her tote bag before I could reach them. She didn't notice me watching. Later when I asked, she said, "Oh, that was junk mail. I threw it out." She spoke quickly. Didn't meet my eyes. That night, sitting alone at the kitchen table, I understood something important. Control doesn't arrive like a storm. It comes like a breeze, slowly rearranging everything. And for the first time, a quiet truth settled in me. Maybe they weren't helping me stay afloat. Maybe they were preparing for the day they hoped I would finally sink. Asterisk. The first true crack appeared on a Tuesday morning. though at the time it felt small enough to ignore if I'd wanted to. I was watering the potted geraniums on my porch when Nancy Crawford, my neighbor of nearly 30 years, stopped at the gate. Her grocery bag was heavy with canned soup and bread, her balance slightly off, as usual. Nancy has always been talkative, the sort who shares information whether you ask for it or not. But that day, her words lodged inside me like a splinter. "Margaret," she called, "your mail carrier dropped off a stack for you yesterday. You must have gotten it by now." Big envelope on top looked official. My stomach tightened. "I haven't received mail in almost a week," I said. "You must be thinking of another house." She stared at me as if I'd said something absurd. "Oh no," she replied lightly. "Well, I know your place." Then she walked on, leaving me standing there with the hose still running, water spilling. Across the porch steps, a thick envelope, legal looking, and yet my mailbox had been empty in that deliberate way, too precise to be chance. I spent the rest of the morning trying to shake the unease. Sometimes it's easier to keep your hands busy than to sit with the dread forming quietly in your chest. I folded laundry. I wiped counters. I straightened bookshelves. But my body moved while my mind tried to assemble a puzzle whose pieces someone else had rearranged. By noon, I made tea and sat by the window, watching the street. Children rode bicycles. A dog tugged impatiently at its owner's leash. Life continued with effortless innocence while suspicion crept toward my own daughter, something I never wanted to entertain. Around 3, the mail truck pulled up. My heart quickened. I stood just inside the window, pulling the curtain aside enough to see. The young mailman stepped out holding letters. He paused at my box, opened it, glanced inside, and placed nothing there. Then he closed it and walked away. A chill slid across my arms. It wasn't that there was no mail. It was the way he checked the box, looked toward the street, and moved on as if this had become routine. As if delivery had already happened, just not to me. I went outside as soon as the truck disappeared. The mailbox was empty, just as I expected. I tapped the metal lid with my fingers, feeling its cold surface under the afternoon sun. I told myself not to jump to conclusions, but true conclusions don't require jumping. They wait patiently to be acknowledged. The next morning, I decided to observe quietly, no accusations, no emotion, just attention, the way Patrick used to approach problems, slowly and deliberately, never tipping his hand. When Helen arrived unannounced, I watched her closely. She moved through the house with crisp efficiency, sorting laundry I hadn't asked her to touch, rearranging the spice rack alphabetically, commenting on dust atop the refrigerator as if it personally offended her. All the while, her tote bag wide, structured, impossible to miss, sat open on a kitchen chair. At one point, as she fetched a cloth from the pantry, I saw it, the corner of an envelope, white, standard size, pressed against the fabric, unmistakable. I stayed. Seated. 70-6 teaches you restraint. It teaches you that the quickest answers are rarely the truest. When she turned back, I asked casually, "Did anything come in the mail today?" Her eyes flickered, just once. "Only junk," she said, lightly. "Coupons. Nothing you need." Nothing you need. Such a small sentence, yet it pressed against something tender inside me. When had someone else begun deciding what I needed? And why did my heart beat faster, the way it used to when someone stood too close behind me in the dark? After she left, I checked the trash. No coupons, no torn envelopes, no mail at all. The tote bag, of course, had gone with her. I sat at the table and let the truth arrive inch by inch, like a winter storm creeping toward the window before the first snow falls. I wasn't forgetting. I wasn't imagining things. Someone was taking my mail before it ever reached my hands, and the worst part wasn't the theft. It was realizing who believed she had the right to do it. That night, I lay awake, listening to the familiar sounds of my house settling, the tick of the hallway clock, the soft hum of the refrigerator cycling on and off. These noises had once soothed me. Now they only sharpened my awareness. Sleep came in fragments. Each time I drifted off, my mind pulled me back with the same thought. What exactly are they hiding from me? By morning, I felt calm in a way that surprised me, not peaceful. Clear. Fear blurs the edges of reality, but clarity sharpens them. And clarity had arrived without asking permission. I decided not to confront Helen, not yet. Accusations give people time to prepare defenses. I wanted truth, not explanations. Instead, I went about my routine as usual. Breakfast at the small kitchen table, tea lightly sweetened. The crossword puzzle I always pretended I didn't care about finishing, even though I did. I moved deliberately, aware that anything out of place might draw attention. At 10 sharp, Helen called. Mom, Mark, and I were thinking about your finances, she began, voice careful, rehearsed. You've had a lot to manage lately? I have, I agreed. There was a pause longer than usual. Agreement wasn't part of her script. Well, she continued, we just want to make sure everything's protected. You know, in case something happens. People say it so casually as if life doesn't already happen every day. I'm managing, I said. We could help, she insisted. It might be easier if Mark handled the paperwork. Handled. Another word that sounded harmless until you felt its weight. I changed the subject. Asked about her garden, her neighbor's new dog. When we hung up, I stared at the phone for a long moment before placing it face down on the table. They were moving faster now. That afternoon, I drove to the post office. The building smelled faintly of dust and paper, comforting in a way modern places never are. I waited patiently in line, listening to conversations about packages and forwarding addresses, until I reached the counter. The clerk was young, efficient, kind. I'm not receiving my mail, I said simply, but I've been told it's being delivered. She typed, frowned slightly, then looked up. According to our system, your mail has been picked up regularly. By me? She hesitated. By someone authorized? My pulse thudded. Authorized how? She turned the screen slightly so I could see. A name was listed beneath mine. Helen Carter. I thanked the clerk and stepped aside, letting the next customer approach. My legs felt unsteady, but my mind remained focused. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a strategy. Outside, I sat in my car with the engine off, hands resting on the steering wheel. The sky stretched wide and indifferent above me. Somewhere a line had been crossed, not recently, but deliberately. My daughter hadn't just taken my mail. She had registered herself as my voice. The realization settled deep. It wasn't anger that followed. It was grief for the trust I'd given, the boundaries I hadn't defended, the version of motherhood that taught me self-erasure was love, but grief doesn't last when something more useful replaces it. Resolve. By the time I drove home, I had already decided my next steps. I would gather information quietly. I would protect what was mine without announcing it. And I would do it in a way they never expected. They believed I was dependent. They believed I was distracted. They believed age had softened me into compliance. They were wrong. The next few days passed quietly, which told me more than any confession ever could. Silence when it follows discovery is never accidental. It's strategy. Helen didn't call as often. Mark didn't stop by with his usual list of small concerns. They were adjusting, recalculating, trying to sense whether I knew more than I let on. I gave them nothing. Instead, I observed. I began keeping notes in an old spiral notebook I'd once used for grocery lists, dates, times, phone calls, visits. What was said and what wasn't. Writing things down steadied me. It transformed unease into order. On Thursday morning, I drove to the bank. I hadn't been inside in months. The automatic doors slid open with a soft hiss, and the familiar scent of paper and polish met me. A young teller smiled and asked how she could help. "I'd like to review my recent statements," I said, in person. She nodded and led me to a small office where a financial advisor joined us. He spoke slowly at first, carefully, the way people do when they assume confusion might follow. I let him finish every sentence, then I asked clear questions, precise ones, as the statements appeared on the screen. A pattern emerged, subtle at first, then unmistakable. Transfers I hadn't authorized. Automatic payments redirected. Small amounts at regular intervals, designed not to draw attention, Mark's method. "I don't remember approving these," I said. The advisor leaned closer to the screen. "They were set up under a limited authorization," he explained. "Signed 3 years ago. 3 years ago. The year I'd been recovering from pneumonia. The year Helen insisted on handling things temporarily. I asked for copies of everything. When I left the bank, the folder in my hands felt heavier than paper should. Not because of its weight, but because of what it confirmed. They hadn't just taken my mail. They'd been slowly emptying my authority. That evening, Helen came by unexpectedly. She smiled too much. Her eyes scanned the house, lingering on the desk, the shelves, the places where she once felt comfortable rearranging my life. "You seem tired, Mom," she said. "Are you sure you're keeping up with everything?" "I am," I replied. She hesitated, then sat. "Mark and I worry. If something happened to you," I looked at her then. Really looked. The daughter I carried, taught to read, stayed up with her fevers. And behind her concern, I saw it clearly now. Fear of losing control. "Nothing has happened to me," I said calmly, "but a great deal has happened to my trust." Her face tightened. "What do you mean?" I continued, that taking someone's mail, money, and decisions without consent isn't help. It's theft. The word landed hard. She stood abruptly. "You're overreacting." "No," I said, "I'm responding." She left soon after, her composure cracking just enough to confirm everything. The next morning, I met with a lawyer. Patrick once trusted. He listened without interrupting, his expression growing more serious with each detail. "You did the right thing by waiting," he said when I finished. "Now we act." We revoked authorizations, changed access, redirected accounts. Quietly, efficiently, permanently. When Mark called that evening angry, demanding explanations, I let it go to voicemail. I wasn't afraid of them anymore. Weeks later, life settled into something new, cleaner, quieter, truer. I still wake early, still drink my tea by the window, still tend my garden. But now, every choice is mine again. Age doesn't make you invisible. It reveals who thinks you are. And I see them clearly now, perhaps more clearly than I ever have, because this time I'm not giving anything away.